Hi, everyone. I should point out right now that I'm not a programmer at all, so it's just going to be on the chess side of things and how we use the programs. Start off with quite a famous photo here that I've got at the start. This is Garry Kasparov on the left, probably the strongest player of all time. I'll go into him in a bit more detail. And he's training Magnus Carlsen over here on the right, who's the current world champion. This sort of a typical modern training scene. You see the 3 laptops around, and then a chessboard as well, because it's useful, actually, to visualize on the board. I'll start with a bit of history. Is it? Which way do I? Sorry. Yeah. This was working. Yeah, it's OK, there we go. Yeah, sorry about that. The first chess-playing machine, you could argue, is the Turk, or the automaton, this thing on the right, built in 1770. So obviously, it wasn't a true computer, more of a magician's conjuring trick. It worked by hiding the chess player inside some disappearing hidden cabinet. And then it had a chessboard on top. And with magnets and wires, he could make moves. And it was supposedly designed for Queen Maria Theresa of Austria for her amusement, but it's slightly unclear. But it caught the public's interest for hundreds of years, showing that the interest in man versus machine battles in chess has been going back a long, long time, centuries. OK, the first real chess computing started in the 1950s. Alan Turing, who's extremely well known as one of the fathers of computing, and his work at Bletchley Park as a cryptographer on the Enigma code. But he actually designed one of the first chess programs, Champ. Now, at the time, there was no hardware anywhere near strong enough or powerful enough to run the program, so he did it by hand. But he played a couple of games, and it worked. And it's actually been reconstructed since, and it works as an engine. It's not particularly strong, but it was still an impressive thing to design before there were any computers around for it to work on. He also is famous for his Turing Test, which is the ability to exhibit, for a machine to exhibit intelligent behavior equivalent to or indistinguishable from that of a human. And he thought that could also be used in chess terms. He said it's not difficult to devise a paper machine which will play a not very bad game of chess with 3 players in separate rooms. Oh, well, you have the 2 players in separate rooms, and you'll struggle to tell. Now, he made a point that the players have to be quite weak, because at the time, the engines were so weak. But nowadays, it would work online very easily, but the players would have to be extremely strong for it to work, as the standard of engines is just so much stronger these days. But it's interesting that he found a use for chess to show intelligence right back from the start. Moving on to the man versus machine battles. In 1950, Claude Shannon wrote a paper where he outlined the number of possible moves in a chess game is the same as that of the electrons in the visible universe, some astronomical number. And so pure calculation is never going to solve the game with any technology we have today, or are likely to have for a long, long time. So instead, heuristics have to be used. And as I've said, I'm no computer programmer, so I'm going to steer clear of trying to explain any of those bits. But it's basically the shortcuts in the system so that it can refine its searching and just look at the strong moves and look in further depth. At this point, I should point out how human top players actually play chess. As a question I'm often asked by non-chess players when they hear that I'm a professional chess player is, how many moves do you think ahead? Which is the kind of #1 question we get asked, which doesn't really have any value as a question. It's, in certain positions, it's possible for me or Magnus or any decent player to probably look like 30, 40 moves ahead if it's completely forcing just one narrow line in some king and pawn endgame, for example, where you're just counting. But that's a very rare circumstance. And most of the time, I would say that the top players don't look more than 3 or 4 moves ahead in their position. So there's too broad a choice to get anywhere further than that. But instead, it's about evaluating the subsequent positions, the intuition, and the pattern recognition, which is really key. And this is what the computers have had to try to, the programs build into the computers, some sort of patterns and understanding of the positions. There's actually a story, it's slightly unclear who said it, but one of the top American players, possibly Capablanca, was asked this question of how many moves do you think ahead? He said 1, but always the right one. It's, but yeah, it just shows it's a pointless question, really. It depends too much on the type of position. David Levy is an English international master and a computer chess expert. And in 1968, he made a substantial bet at the time of £1,250, which was a lot of money. I think a house was just a couple £1,000, so you can tell the value there, that a computer couldn't defeat him in a match within 10 years. And he was extremely confident. He wrote clear that in 1973, 5 years in, that clear that I shall win my bet in 1978. And I still win if the period were extended for another 10 years, which, with hindsight, was actually correct. This is the issue they were having of programming any intelligence into computer programs. It's easy enough to teach a computer how to play, but as we've established already, that pure calculation just isn't enough. It needs some heuristic knowledge. But he slightly exaggerated by saying that the idea of an electronic world champion belongs only in the pages of a science fiction book, whereas these days, while we don't call it a world champion, they're far stronger than our top players. So as the bet was coming to an end for the 10 years, he played various matches in 1977, 78, winning them all easily. And he also won the final match that he played against Chess 4.7, which was the strongest program around at the moment, at that time. But he did lose one game, which was the first time a top international master had lost to a computer program. And he had to eat his words somewhat from 1973, saying, I proved my 1968 assessment correct. But on the other hand, my opponent in this match was very, very much stronger than I thought possible when I started the bet. Now, nothing would surprise me. It transpired that actually he would have been right, and he would have won the bet for another 10 years, because it took until 1989 for him to lose his first match against a computer, against Deep Thought, which we'll come on to in a moment. During the 1980s, the computers were still struggling, but making quite quick progress. But as you can see here, the experts weren't particularly impressed. As new scientists said, computers play terrible chess. Humans only lose to them by making horrible blunders. And Byte was similar with its ugly, inelegant chess, but tactically they're freer from error, which was basically what was happening at the time for computers, that they didn't make blunders. They could calculate a certain number of moves ahead, so they're not going to leave a piece on pre, but they didn't understand chess at all. And so their moves lacked all logic. It was purely making sure, I'll take a pawn, you can't take it back, fine. But it didn't understand what was happening for any long-term strategic elements. It took until matches against this man, Garry Kasparov, before computers really could challenge the grandmasters. As we saw in 1989, Deep Thought defeated David Levy, who's an international master, the level below a grandmaster. And Garry Kasparov took it on himself to be the savior of humanity, as he put it, to try and fight against these machines and prove that chess players were still stronger than the computer programs. And he played various matches. In 1989, he defeated Deep Thought. And in 96, he played his first famous match against Deep Blue. It's actually often thought that he lost straight away against Deep Blue, as people only think there was one match. But he won the first match 4-2, although he did lose the first game. But it was the next year that he had a rematch against Deeper Blue, which was twice as powerful as Deep Blue, could calculate 200,000 moves a second. And I read somewhere that it's 259th most powerful supercomputer in existence at the time. IBM was making it very clear that it wanted to win this match. Now, I saw an interview with Magnus Carlsen, the reigning world champion, recently, and he made the point that a lot of chess players have made, that at this time, Garry Kasparov was far stronger than Deeper Blue. So he should not have lost this match at all. But the psychology, I think, was the problem. He didn't expect the match to be close. And once he lost one game, he just couldn't cope with it. We'll also come on to the fact that his style is ill-suited to play computers in a moment. He actually accused IBM of cheating at the end with what looks like a rather ironic complaint these days, but he accused the computer of having human help. As you saw during the 1980s, it was sort of established that computers played ugly chess, that they could see tactics but do nothing else. And he was complaining that certain moves played by the computer were human. That, for example, it declined to take material straight away to give him a big initiative or give him long-term strategic prospects, and instead stamped down on his counterplay first, which seemed a huge step for computers, this new level for them. Since then, there have been a few more man versus machine battles. The commercial engines have got much stronger. Already by the 2000s, the top commercial engines that you could just be running on your laptop or PC were as strong as the top humans. And there are various matches with these. Fritz is a famous one that played Kramnik, who became world champion after Garry Kasparov. He beat him in 2000, so he was reigning world champion at this point. He drew the match 4-all, but used anti-computer tactics in it. He prepared much better and thought about the types of position the computer's good at. And we'll come on to the difference between Kramnik and Kasparov in a moment. Kasparov came back and played a couple matches in 2003 and drew them both. But it was clear that already the engines were getting there, that they no longer needed to run on supercomputers to fight the top players. And that was sort of compounded completely in 2005, where Mickey Adams, England's #1 player, and a player who's been in the top 10 for a long, long time, since the 1990s, lost against Hydra running a supercomputer with specialized software, 5.5, who was destroyed in the match. It was extremely painful. The final match was this Kramnik against Deep Fritz. Vladimir Kramnik trying again. And although he lost the match 4-2, he showed that he actually understood the game much better than the computer. He outplayed the computer, but then showed the human traits of tiredness and making inexplicable blunders. The most famous one, or infamous, I should say, is the position we have here. Vladimir Kramnik was black, and he'd been pressing for the whole game. But now, probably it should be a draw. And anyone who, I don't know if you all know how to play the game, but anyone who can play can see that the threat, as you see the arrow, Queen H7 is checkmate. And Vladimir Kramnik, who must have been completely exhausted from the match, just completely overlooked it. I think he played his queen to E3, which did nothing to stop the threat, and was checkmate in 1. Now, it's completely unheard of for a top player to miss checkmate in 1, but it just shows the psychological pressure he was under, playing someone who'd never make a mistake. The last match that shows sort of how much the engines are better than us is this Nakamura-Komodo match. Komodo is one of the strongest engines. It keeps changing exactly which is the strongest as new versions come out, but one of the 3 strongest engines around right now. Hikaru had white. Hikaru is in the top 10 in the world, 5 or 6 or something at the moment, one of the top American players. He had white, which is like the serve in tennis, so already a sizable advantage by itself, and he was given an extra pawn to start with. One of black's pawns was taken away, which you'd hope would be enough of an advantage for one of the top players in the world, but he lost the match 1.5, 2.5 regardless, which actually is probably quite a good showing by him as well. But it's clear that the time for man versus machine battles has come to an end. Kasparov foresaw this a little and brought in advanced chess and played a match with Topalov. Vesselin Topalov became world champion as well subsequently to this match. And they drew 3-all. Now, advanced chess is a sort of hybrid version of chess where you both have access to a computer during the game. And you're hoping that you can play extremely high quality, of course, with the computers there, stopping any blunders. But it's not really taken off as a discipline. I think because it's a bit dull, you're lacking the sports element of it. The games are almost perfect, but which means that the games almost always end in a draw. And it's it's not really a spectator sport. However, correspondence chess still utilizes it to some extent. Once the top engine started beating the humans, correspondence chess almost died as a discipline because the players just started putting their games straight onto the computer, and it was computer versus computer for a long time. Some places tried to outlaw that, but these days most allow it. It's actually been proven that a human is still better than a computer in various long-term decisions and can also tweak around with the computer playing through moves. So a computer plus a human beats a computer by itself most of the time. And so correspondence chess is still living, but it's a very scientific sport for me, and I much prefer the practical element of playing over the board with clocks and some time limit rather than 2 days a move, 3 days a move. Just to give an idea of how strong the engines are right now, they have an ELO of probably around 3,300. It's quite hard to judge because the system isn't really supposed to work that high. But to give it some sort of meaning for you, Magnus Carlsen is the highest rated player of all time, the world champion, and he's about 2850. I'm ranked 110th in the world at the moment at 2650. And to become an international master, you need to be 2400. A decent club player is about 1800, and an amateur player would probably, a good amateur player would probably be around 1000 or something, that doesn't play competitively but knows how the pieces move and can beat all their friends. So you can see quite how much stronger than the humans computers have become. But we can still use them in various different ways. So I said I was coming back to this. Why did Vladimir Kramnik do so much better than Garry Kasparov in the match? After all, Garry Kasparov is considered to be the strongest player of all time, and he was playing a weaker engine than Vladimir Kramnik. So there's no reason that Vladimir scored so much better. But there were a couple of reasons. First of all, Vladimir Kramnik prepared much better. He thought about what kind of positions the computers are good at and adapted his play accordingly. But secondly, his style just worked so much better against computers. Garry Kasparov played extremely aggressive chess, both over the board and in his mannerisms, as everyone who played him could say that they felt the rage coming from his eyes, the glare. You could feel force coming from him. He played aggressively, tried to kill you, and you just felt under pressure right from the start. His preparation was so good normally that he was always attacking with either color, and his opponents just collapsed. It was the famous Kasparov attack. However, when he played the computer didn't feel any of this psychology, didn't feel that it was supposed to collapse, and it was just following its algorithms and just playing whatever move it thought was strongest. And I think that that opposition really hurt Kasparov. He was used to his opponents just rolling over. However, with that, Kasparov was a fantastic calculator, and still is. He came back and played a blitz tournament, speed chess, just last month, I think it was, against the top American players in the world, who are the top players in the world at the moment. And he performed very well. I think he scored -1 or something out of the long tournament. So he proved he's still a fantastic player, despite having retired 10 years ago. But he could calculate and out-calculate his opponents. He wanted a mess. He wanted sharp positions, exactly the kind of positions computers can calculate so well. So his style was sort of the wrong one to play a computer. Vladimir Kramnik, on the other hand, has been one of the top players since the 1990s. He was world champion in 2000, and I think he's still ranked #2 in the world on the most recent list. He's had an incredibly long career. And he's a strategic player. He likes long-term advantages that he can slowly press on his opponent. He understands the game so much better than everyone else. He's not involved in these tricky tactics, the skirmishes. He wants to steer clear of that and just outplay his opponents comfortably. And this is slow, closed maneuvering chess is what computers struggle at. And so Kramnik was able to score so much better. Now, one of the main problems for early computers, and it's still the case now, is horizon effect. however you're programming the computer, eventually it will come to a point where it reaches the end of its calculation, and it's got to evaluate the position. And that's the hardest point for the programmers. Now, the computer will count the material at that point, try and make some advantages. For example, the bishop pair, it will give some advantage for that. It'll give some advantage if it's got a better pawn structure. But it's still difficult for it to establish, for example, if it's being attacked, whether it will get checkmated or not. If it calculates and it can't see a checkmate, then it's happy to go for the position, whereas a human might steer clear from it completely and say, no, this position is far too dangerous. You see it exists, especially in the King's Indian defense, where black is happy to have slightly less space. White goes for a big attack, but black is attacking the king. And you see often that the computer completely overestimates white's chances. We'll see a couple of examples now. This position on the left is an artificial position, of course, that I've just set up. But black has 2 extra rooks. I should just point out at this point, probably most of you know how chess is scored, but pawns are normally counted at 1 point, bishops and knights at 3, rooks at 5. And the way, I don't know, this is too small, I think, for anyone to read, but the way the engines count is the same. So here it's got an evaluation of -11. This is the Stockfish 7, which is the one. Stockfish is the main program used by the top players at the moment, I think, together with Komodo. But so the computer thinks black is completely winning. Any advantage of over like 1.5 or something is a decisive advantage. And under 1 is a clear advantage, and 0.5 is some slight advantage. More pleasant, that side, but nothing killing. But a human can tell this position is just dead drawn. The rooks can do absolutely nothing. They can't attack any of white's pawns, so it's obviously a draw. But a computer won't realize that. It will keep calculating lines and keep counting that black has 2 extra rooks. So black must be winning. It just can't find how to do it. This position on the right is from an actual game, a famous game of Rybka as white, which was one of the strongest engines in the world a few years ago, against Hikaru Nakamura, the top American, I said. It was played on the Internet Chess Club online, so it's a blitz speed game. You can see that the position is quite similar to the one I set up on the left, with the structure closed. White has extra exchange, that's a rook for the knight. So a nominal advantage, so 5 versus 3, and my engine gives it as +1 or something up there. But it's clear that the rooks, again, can do nothing, whereas the knight actually has some nice squares. So any top player would prefer to be black here. Black is the only one who can do anything. But of course, it should be a dead draw. Hikaru was actually very clever. He just kept doing nothing and waiting for the computer. He knew that the computer must think that white is better with the extra material. And so he just waited. So here we have on the left, very little has happened except that Hikaru has been happy to give up another exchange. That's another rook for a minor piece. And so the computer has 2 rooks, 10, against bishop knight, which is 6. So 4-point advantage, which is resignable. Except, of course, here, the rooks still do nothing. A human, I think, would play f5 here, giving away this pawn. Just try and open up some lines for this rook pair. But the computer was happy just to keep going. It didn't want to give up anything. And so we get to this position on the right. Now, in competitive chess, if you play for 50 moves without any pawn moves or captures, then you can claim a draw. Sorry, what is this? So it went from that position on the right to this one. Nothing has happened in those 50 moves. 48 moves or something have been played. The engine still thinks it must be winning. After all, it's 4 points up. But it realized if it doesn't just play c4, this move it played, giving up a pawn for absolutely nothing, then it will just be a draw. So it played this ridiculous move that, and sure enough, this position on the right happened quite quickly, where black is just completely winning. All of the pawns on the queen side disappeared. These pawns were pushed down. And a famous victory for Hikaru, as already by this point, the engines were supposed to be so much stronger than humans, especially in a speed game where humans just make mistakes far more often. So it shows that the engine still had something to learn. I think these days the computer would accept at some point that this is going to be a draw, and it wouldn't play a ridiculous move after some thought. But actually, what if I do have an evaluation? Yeah, and it still wants to play c4 up there, but it calls it a draw. It's accepted that there's no winning chances anymore. I'll show you one more example, one of my own games, about problems that the computer has evaluating. So this is a game of mine where I'm black against Aaron Summerscale, another English Grandmaster from the British Championships, I think 2009. Now, this was a King's Indian. The opening I mentioned that computers are particularly bad at understanding. White has broken through over here, and I've given up a whole rook, actually, to attack on the king side. But I can win back the bishop at any point. So the initial evaluation of my computer was +2. I don't know if you can see that, but it's counting the rook versus the bishop. So it goes 5 minus 3, 2. But I have this plan of putting my queen back to h6 and bring my rook round to h4 and taking this bishop. He can't move his queen, or else I play queen takes bishop, checkmate, straight away. And so he can't actually escape from his king. And so black is just completely winning. There's no defense here at all. And sure enough, after some thought, it's too small against c, but I'll read out that the evaluation is -6.3 or something. So black is completely winning. There is absolutely no way to stop this. And sure enough, my opponent resigned a few moves later. But you still see this happen occasionally in preparation by players that, especially in the King's Indian, it happened, even one of the top players in the world fell into it recently against Hikaru Nakamura, who'd played a line the engine thought was clearly better for white, even winning for white, but it just didn't look deep enough. It didn't understand the danger that was around the corner. So these days, man versus machine battles are no longer interesting. The machines are too strong, but they're still very useful for research and opening preparation, which is a major part of chess. In the old days, research was difficult. The top players had to buy every new book, every new magazine that was around. Bobby Fischer actually learned Russian so that he could read the Russian chess magazine. That was the extent that it was so difficult to get knowledge. So even learning a foreign language was worth it simply to see any new games in there, new ideas. If you had friends playing in a tournament, you'd ask them to bring back the tournament bulletins so that you could play through all the games there to see if there was any interesting new ideas. But the advantage of that was that if any new ideas, novelties as they're called, were played or that you'd come up with, then you could reuse them in multiple tournaments, in multiple games, win the same way lots of times. Now, with information traveling so fast, that's completely impossible. And if a novelty is played today, for example, there's a top tournament going on, everyone will have analyzed it by this evening. So there's no shock value at all anymore if someone else has played it. On the right, I've got a photo of Bob Wade here. Now, Bob Wade was a New Zealand IM who moved to England when he was very young. But he had a fantastic research library in England. And a lot of players went to him for all this knowledge that no one else had. And Bobby Fischer actually used him in the match against Spassky, the most famous chess match of all time in 1972, because he had such a big library and such good contacts, and asked him to create a dossier on Spassky, showing quite how difficult it was to get information. I remember in the early days when I was playing, where computers had come out, but they were still very basic, that we all had these ECOs, or Encyclopedia of Chess Openings, which are extremely heavy books that we all had to carry around in our suitcase. They had no text in them, no words, but simply lines of chess analysis with an evaluation. Now these books now are completely defunct. There's a computer has it all, but I remember having to carry these around and checking these lines in here. I'm happy that these days it's very rare for any of the top players to take opening books around with them. It's just extra weight that you can have so many millions of books in your laptop. And so really these days, a laptop is all that top players will take to a tournament. Now ChessBase was really the founder of the computer preparation. It understood the way that things were going. Founded in Hamburg in 1986. Hamburg is sort of a chess technology center for some reason. It's a database program, and it has millions and millions of games in it. The most recent of its databases, I think it's Mega Database 2016. It's got 6.5 million games. And so if you played any tournament somewhere, it's likely that your games will be there. An opponent can prepare for you, check your openings. There's also ebooks. Most books these days, electronic books, are also published in ChessBase format. So you can play through them without needing a board. And everything is done on the laptop. Together with having access to all those games, there are all these engines now that you can use to analyze your own games, analyze the top games. Fritz was really the first one, the sister program of ChessBase. Sorry. And for a decade, probably, people used Fritz as shorthand. Sorry, I'll get some water. When they meant any computer program. These days, it's been overtaken somewhat by others. Rybka, I mentioned earlier, was world champion multiple times in the 2005, 2010 time. But it got caught that it had stolen code from other programs, and it was stripped of its titles. These days, the top three are probably Komodo, Houdini, and Stockfish. I believe a guy from Stockfish came here last year and gave a lecture. And needless to say, all of these are far stronger than Deep Blue and Deeper Blue, and it beat Kasparov, even running on my basic laptop there. The internet has really revolutionized chess. Not only can you play online multiple places. I grew up playing on ICC, Internet Chess Club. But you can download all the recent games on TWIC or The Week in Chess, which is a website of Mark Crowther, who's been going for over 20 years, and he collates all the games played, published online, puts them all in one place, tidies them up. And so every week, Tuesday morning, all the professional players are there downloading this new database and checking what's been played during the week for any new ideas. Lots of places you can play online, as I said, and following chess live is really a huge benefit. These days, there are lots of places you can play, but this Chess24 is probably the new market leader in live games. I've just got a picture here of me having played on there. You can play on there as well, watch videos. It's also based in Hamburg. And it gives you nearly all the elite tournaments that are going on. So you can watch the top players playing almost all year round with an evaluation next to it if you want. Although I don't really like having the computer evaluation. It's meant that the player sitting at home can criticize the top player's choices the whole time without understanding anything at all about it. They know it's a mistake, but they have no idea why. And so you get a lot of armchair criticism, which is annoying. But they also have commentators, grandmasters normally talking through the moves, which is far more helpful. And because the computer can never tell you what plans, a position you should be using, or indeed why a move is a mistake, other than it is. So the computers are useful, but a human is much more useful for understanding about a position and what you should be trying to achieve. On Chess24, you can also watch various videos by the world's top players. It's marketing itself as a tool for the strongest players, really, whereas Chess.com, the American version, or not an American rival, markets itself for weaker players and has more amateur videos, whereas this is really the top level. But there are lots of others as well. Another tool that you can use online are Tablebases. This one's from Shredder, another program. Now, Tablebase is a tool where, with a certain number of pieces, they've solved every possible position. It's currently at 7 pieces. So any position with 7 pieces or fewer, you can put in here, and it will tell you what the evaluation is with 100% guarantee whether it's a win or a draw, and in how many moves. So here I've put some random position that I had no idea whether it was winning or not. But it tells me it's a win in 31 up there. This is a slightly worrying trend, perhaps, but it's still a long, long way to go from 7 to the 32 pieces that we start with. So we don't need to worry about that for probably at least a century, so that'll be okay. Smartphone technology is probably more of an issue that I'll come to in a moment. This is just a screenshot from my iPhone with the Stockfish app, which is quite a good one to play against. You can also, there's a very good Chess24 app to watch the live games that I've got on my phone. So when you're traveling, you can go around, and lots of other apps. But this plays at International Master Standard or something. And so it's good to play. It's a challenge for me to beat. I would need to be concentrating hard to beat it. But it means that we come to some problems. I point out that chess isn't really in danger of being solved. They're only at 7 pieces at the moment, and the amount of data required to shunder through all of those possible piece coordinations from 7 up to 8 is taking them a long time with lots of supercomputers. So getting up to 32 is not going to happen. But chess clubs struggling is a big issue in a lot of places, which is understandable. With the internet now, where you can play chess online, day or night, any time control you want, against almost any standard you want as well. You can watch the top games. You can see analysis videos by strong players. The players willing to drive for a long way to some cold hall to play some chess doesn't really appeal. And chess clubs are going to have to make themselves much more sociable to keep their members. And a lot of them are really struggling around the world. The main issue is cheating. That smartphones and the increase in technology is starting. This is an old book of William Hartson, How to Cheat at Chess, but written before the computer revolution. So he doesn't mention this possible way of cheating, but it's the biggest threat we have at the moment. Most top-level tournaments are all relayed online, and some are now delaying the coverage for 15 minutes or half an hour to try and prevent this. But it means that anyone at home can tell you what's going on and what the computers suggest to play. And this happened in Khanty-Mansiysk in 2010 in the Olympiad, which is the biggest chess tournament and one of the most prestigious ones. Well, it's the equivalent of the Olympics. It happens every 2 years. The French team, Sébastien Feller, a young, talented, and very strong player, was found to have been cheating with the help of their captain, with some elaborate system where the captain would walk around the boards. It was a 4-game match, and so he would stop either in front or behind, and each place he stopped was a coordinate. So if he stopped the first time, at the third one, that would be C, go around again, go around twice, and that would be 6 or whatever. So he would tell what square to move a piece on. And he had an accomplice back in France who was there with an engine, texting him the top moves. It actually wouldn't have been found out, apart from the stupidity of the person at home who was using the French Federation's phone to send the text through. And when he gave it back, they saw this information history of all of these text messages. Of course, they were all banned from playing chess for a few years. But it's a big issue. I don't think it's so bad at the top, because not only you hope that the morals and ethics of the top players are good enough not for them to cheat, but when it's their livelihood, they're not going to risk cheating, or else they're expelled for good. But at the lower levels, especially in America, where they have big prizes for under 1,000 ELO, for example, so just for amateur players, the temptation to cheat is very strong. This guy, Borislav Ivanov, in 2013, was a Bulgarian amateur player who suddenly had some fantastic results. He was never found guilty of cheating, but he was playing Max Lugi, a Russian-American grandmaster, who told him to take off his shoes, and he refused, saying his feet were too smelly, and promptly withdrew from the tournament. And it's clear that he had something hidden there in his shoe. He came back and happily took off his shoes, but he had a new deformed back that he refused to let anyone check. So it was clear that he was definitely cheating. Another high-profile one was this Gaios Negeladze from Georgia, a grandmaster who was last year in the Dubai Open found guilty of using his mobile phone during the games. He'd hidden it in the bathroom and was going out there in between his moves and consulting the phone and then hiding it behind some toilet paper, behind some cistern. So it's at all levels we're having this problem of cheating. There are various attempts at preventing it. At the top level, at all levels, you're not allowed to have a mobile phone on you in any internationally rated tournament game. You can perhaps have it beside you. They keep changing the rules, but no mobile phones. And in the next Olympiad, which will be in Baku this year, we're not allowed to take pens either, or anything electronic. So they're trying to stop anything. We go through metal detectors at the start of the game, and there's talk of testing us during the games now as well with a handheld metal detector, which is too much, I think, because it's quite hard to focus when you're being tested the whole time. And each time I've seen this test, the guy use it, one of the FIDE officials, one of the World Governing Body officials, it keeps beeping at everything. So it sounds very distracting. But we'll see what happens. You really need to stop spectators being allowed to have phones as well if you're going to do this, because otherwise it's too easy to relay information. So I'll finish up with actually how we use the programs ourselves. So there's two different approaches for a professional player when they're preparing. There's the preparation at home and then at a tournament. So at home, most people have their desktops and stronger programs, but they can also use cloud engines with remote access as well. You work on your own opening lines, your own repertoire. You've got all the recent top-level games that you can check through to refine your repertoire. The correspondence games are very valuable a lot of the time because they're basically Centaurs, as I had before, the computer hybrid with humans. So they're spending a lot of time thinking hard about the right moves. So their choices should be taken seriously. Opening books are becoming much better, both the ones that are used for the engines themselves and the old-fashioned paper ones. During the 1990s, there was a period where chess books went downhill quite substantially, where lazy authors were just using computer printouts, basically. But as everyone has access to such strong engines these days, the opening books really need to give strategic information about where the pieces should go and how exactly you should be continuing the games. You're looking for novelties, new ideas in any of these lines. But I'll explain it's changed slightly from 20 years ago on this. When you're at a tournament, you don't have as much time to prepare. Normally, you're not going to find any new idea in the morning. Instead, you're looking through your opponent's games. With ChessBase, you can just type in their name. You'll get all of their games they've ever played, their recent games. You can check where they've performed badly. You try to find positions that they don't feel comfortable playing, or some line that they don't know the theory very well, they've not kept up to date. And really, this psychology, you're trying to find a position that they don't like playing. Some people, as we'll see in a moment, have said there's no such thing as psychology in chess, but you only need to look at the Kasparov Deep Blue match to see that that's wrong, that psychology does play an important part. For example, Fischer wrote, "I don't believe in psychology, I believe in good moves." But then, I thought I added in the C. Ignore that. He also wrote, "I like the moment when I break a man's ego," which is surely pure psychology. It's the former world champion Alekhine wrote, "Psychology is the most important factor in chess." And the current world champion Magnus Carlsen said, "I'm trying to beat the guy sitting across from me, trying to choose the moves that's the most unpleasant for him and his style." And that's really the key thing now in preparation. People are just trying to find unpleasant ideas for the opponent to face. It doesn't really matter if they're objective merit. It's all subjective and putting pressure on them. Now, the use of engines has evolved. So when we had the strong engines arrive on the scene 20 years ago, the top players had hardware battles. They were all trying access to the strongest supercomputers. Vesselin Topalov, a Bulgarian former world champion, had a supercomputer in Sofia from the Bulgarian state that he could have just working through opening lines. and a mixture of people trying to find the newest software, putting it on better and better hardware, going through all of the old established lines and seeing where there were mistakes, which won a few games, but there are also some disasters. The most infamous one is Kramnik's against Leko from the World Championships in 2004 in Brissago, Switzerland. Now, Peter Leko, a Hungarian player who's known to be very solid, was playing black, and he's played the martial attack, which is a sharp line of the royal pairs where black gives up a pawn for some pressure. These days, it's generally been worked out to a draw, where white diffuses the pressure, black has the bishop pair in an open position, which is some advantage, and he holds the draw, as a lot of these lines have been worked out to a draw now with the engines. But at the time, Kramnik took it on. And they reached this position. Now, white has this strong pass pawn on a6, and it's almost a queen. And if you look over here, I don't know if you, something up here, I don't know if you can see, but it says that white is between 0.8 and 1.03 better, meaning he's got sort of a pawn advantage. He thinks that, the computer thinks black must give up one of his two bishops to stop this pawn, and white has some advantage. But that was my old Fritz program running for just a few seconds. As Stockfish points out, this queen d3 move is completely winning, -4, more than -4.5. And it's not very difficult to see why. White's king is so vulnerable that you are backing a queen after all, and queen, bishop, knight are all attacking black's king, all attacking white's king. Now, Vladimir Kramnik had prepared this, but obviously he hadn't spent enough time on this position, and he'd forgotten to think. He was simply moving him or his second. In these matches, they have a lot of seconds working through the computers for them. Had forgotten to think and just trusted the engine's top choice and not given it enough time. During the game, Peter found queen d3 and won very quickly. It was a huge shock, as Kramnik had blitzed out this position just to lose straight away with white, which is a disaster for him. But he did go on to, well, tie for the match and maintain his title. So you do have to be careful when you're preparing with an engine, not just believe what it says, but actually think about the game as well. Now the playing field is much more level. Before, I have a lot of older grandmasters who are complaining to me a lot, from the English ones who won a lot of games in the 80s, for example, that they used to be able to beat weaker players just in the opening. Their guys didn't really know what they were doing, and they could win nice and quickly without expending any effort. But these days, where everyone has access to a strong engine, everyone, even if they don't have a strong computer themselves, can use remote access. There's cloud sharing software. And they can also see all these top-level games. They know what they're doing in their openings, and most, even weak players, have lines that they understand well. And so it's become much more difficult for the grandmasters to win. And so it's changed slightly how we're playing. The surprise factor is huge, not just when you're playing a weaker player, but also when the top players are playing each other. They're no longer going down mainline battles as they were 20 years ago, even up to about 10 years ago, and just having a hardware battle. They're trying to trick their opponent as early as possible and get them thinking for themselves and not relying on what their computers told them to play before the tournament. There are a couple of different ways of doing this. Now, the holy grail of preparation is really this: finding a strong move not considered strong by the computer. You can be sure if you're playing any of the top grandmasters in the world that they will be going through the top couple of choices of an engine at all times, in any position. So if you can find a move that the computer doesn't like, but is actually strong, even dangerous is good enough, then it's worth playing for once, a one-off game. We'll see an example coming up. Also, lines with less theory are becoming much more common, deviating as early as possible. Examples like the London system, which always had a reputation as being very boring, and white wasn't really trying to do anything, has become very topical at the top level, because at least it keeps all the pieces on the board. White can just outplay his weaker opponent and black can't just blitz out some long line and draw, as he can in the well-worked-out variations. So it's really practical chess. For example, this is a very early position, but this is my game against Magnus Carlsen, the current world champion. Now, the main move is to take with the knight, and it's an open Sicilian. I play the dragon variation, which I know very well, and I've written a book on it last year. And I was looking forward to playing against a world champion and seeing what he had prepared against me, and testing my lines. But of course, he didn't let me. Instead, took with the queen, which is quite a rare option. He had a particular new idea as well to deviate from theory. And even if it wasn't objectively taking with the knight is stronger, but it gave me practical problems. I had to spend a lot of time to navigate the early issues that I had, and he exploited that earlier on in the game, getting some huge time advantage. Most of the top players have a lot of these ideas for one-off games, and you have some collection of lots of these lines, so the opponents can't prepare for everything. This is a position from another game of Hikaru Nakamura, the American, against Mura-Anand, the former world champion, from this year's candidates tournament. Now, the way that the world champion is decided in chess is they play a match against the winner of the candidates tournament. This year, Sergei Karyakin won it, but Mura-Anand won the previous one and had a rematch. Now, Vishy's openings are very good. So Hikaru, first of all, has played 1c4, the English opening, which has less theory, less forcing lines to start with. Vishy's played quite a critical, sharp line against it. And here, I don't know if you can see these, but I have Hayek's opening book, the opening book in the Hayek's engine here, which is, I think, one of the best ones. And it tells me that knight takes b4, knight takes bishop, is the most common move and played a lot. And there's a couple other options. But instead, Hikaru played a3, attacking his bishop, which is forcing, but not considered by the engine in any of its top choices. And they reached this position, which is already very messy, very early on. And Hikaru said afterwards that he was essentially gambling that Vishy would not be prepared for it, and he'd play more human-looking moves. And this is really where preparation is going, that players are trying to force practical problems as early as possible. Here, I think the last move was just attacking this bishop, pawn up. And Vishy dropped his bishop back, which looks like the safest move, but he got into a lot of trouble. And up here, it already says, actually, that White's attack is worth a clear advantage, worth a pawn already, some huge attack. Nakamura won very quickly. Vishy had to play g takes h4, which looks unnatural, and the position would still be about equal. So as he didn't change any theoretical verdicts, this line is still fine for black, but it was a practical problem that the engine hadn't helped Vishy with beforehand. So I'll just finish with how the playing style of the top players has changed. So as the top players are working constantly with the engines, of course, the engine's ideas have rubbed off on the top players. And they play much more concretely now. Moves that would have been dismissed in the 1980s, 1990s as ugly, and go, no, you can't play that way, and just rejected, are now analyzed concretely. And if they work, it doesn't matter if they're ugly or not. So this is one key factor. Chess has become much more concrete. Players have had to have broader repertoires as well because of the ease of preparation. And there's a couple different ways. Magnus puts pressure on his opponent, the world champion, in a long game. He's not trying to win in the opening, but instead get some position where he has a long-term advantage. This is also brought around by computers that show that you can carry on playing. In the 1980s, they started agreeing a lot of quick draws, and they started to worry that chess was dead or dying as they had more and more quick draws in the same openings. But the computers and Magnus, as the chief exponent, have proven that you can just carry on playing, and you'll get chances. Fabiano Caruana, another of the top American players, has a different style, but still a computer-generated one. He'll play the main lines, but he works extremely hard, extremely good research, and forces new ideas. So he's a very dangerous opponent. The chess playing peak age has also changed with the top engines. This is Sergei Karyakin, who's playing the World Championship match against Magnus Carlsen later this year, hopefully. Although it's supposed to be in New York in November, but a Russian winning the candidates has messed that up somewhat, I think, and they don't have a venue. But he became the youngest ever Grandmaster, and it's no real surprise that him and Magnus are both born in 1990, both very young for traditional chess players. But with the internet and the opportunity of spending so many thousands of hours working on chess, playing chess when you're young, means that these guys, when they're teenagers, have played more games than, for example, Capablanca, who was world champion 100 years ago, did in his entire career. So there's no surprise that they're becoming strong top players early on. The slight surprise is that the mature players are staying at the top longer than they used to. Particularly Vishy, who we mentioned, only lost his world championship match at the age of 43. And in fact, the previous world championship match he played against Boris Gelfand, who's older than him. I think this is because they learned chess before engines arrived on the scene, and they learned how to analyze by themselves. The top players at the moment are so used to having a computer running, they're very good at researching and number crunching the top lines, but find it very difficult to come up with their own ideas. And these older guys know how to analyze by themselves and can come up with independent, strong moves, which put pressure on their opponents. It'll be interesting to see in the future how that changes. But people seem to be moving further away from having pure hardware battles and going for a tricky, practical approach. I hope you've enjoyed. Are there any questions? Yeah, no, they've overtaken some old theory. There's endgame theory as well as opening theory. So for that, it's changed when you're working at home. But yeah, of course, when you're playing the game, it doesn't matter whether it's a win or a draw, because a lot of these are very obscure. But they are included in most engines. So the engine battles, they'll know what the evaluation is. It helps if you're preparing and you've got a table base in there so that when it's calculating, it knows whether it's a win or a draw at the end of the line. But yeah, it's more of a scientific thing than a practical. It doesn't change the chess evaluations very much. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah.
Can you live only from playing chess?
Yeah.
Are you also a chess trainer or just...
No, I am trying just to play, although I wrote this book last year as well. There are a lot of players who make a living from teaching chess, particularly in schools and to kids. And in England, especially, there's quite a lot of writers of chess. But you can make a living. But probably the top 100 in the world or so can make a living from playing chess purely. You play in leagues around the world that pay you to play, and there's tournament prize money. But you need to be in the top, probably 30 in the world, to have this rating of 2,700 or higher. And then you're invited to the elite events, and yeah, you can make a good living if you're at that level. So yeah, there's not that many people who can make a living purely from playing. Yeah.
Do top players on public appearances, when it's perhaps not the most high-profile match, avoid playing their best ideas in order to prevent them from becoming public knowledge too early?
I think they probably used to more now, but now there are fewer ideas. I don't know, really. It's the top players try and avoid playing outside their own elite events anyway. And it's, for example, there's a tournament in the Netherlands, Valkensee, in January. And they were saying that the players were hiding a lot of preparation they had for the candidates tournament, which was a month later. But I don't know how true that really is. I think they'll play slightly differently, yeah, different opening choices anyway. But yeah, I'm not sure how many novelties they'll be hiding themselves. It's so difficult to come up with a novelty and keep it. So I came up with a really interesting idea that I was proud of, but then Anish Giri, top Dutch player, played it before I had the chance and beat mura-Anand quickly and go, oh, okay, so much for that. It's, once the surprise value's gone, then it's not worthless, but you lose a lot of the advantage of it. So I think you play it as early as you can. just get happy. Yeah.
What's the status of the King's Indian at the top level? My understanding is that the bayonet attack is the classical line of fashion a few years ago.
Well, yeah, there's always a fashion. I think the King's Indian is an incredibly difficult opening for both sides because the computers don't understand it. So it's probable that white is doing very well, but you need to be extremely accurate to prove it. So even there's lots of players playing at the top level still. Hikaru Nakamura being one of the main ones. They won't play it the whole time, but it's very double-edged. But I think it's still healthy. The bayonet attack, yeah, as you said, was played by Vladimir Kramnik against Garry Kasparov and put Garry off playing. But it's, as all these lines have been analyzed out a lot, black seems to be holding equality or a draw in the bayonet at the moment. So dangerous, but dangerous for both sides. It's, so I think perfectly playable. You just don't want to fall into long lines of opening preparation of your opponent. So people don't play it the whole time. They switch around and play different lines. Yeah.
You mentioned that people deviated from the standard lines more quickly. You also mentioned that Carlsen played games out longer. Have the games generally gotten longer?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. They're playing fewer forcing lines, trying to get the games on their own early and just keeping maneuvering. The top players now are much healthier than they used to be. To be one of the top players, you have to be a professional athlete, and the games can go on for a long time. Magnus is the big example, but yeah, all the other players are still grinding away, just going for a long game. They've realized that people make mistakes when they get tired, yeah, so you just keep it going. Because the general level's got so much higher, I think, that you have to just keep going if you want to be one of the top players in the world. It's no longer good enough to try the opening, and if it's still equal, just agree a draw, which was the case when there were a few strong players, but they were much, much better than the rest. So they could play a bit, go, okay, you've prepared this opening, let's agree a draw. Yeah.
What's the best option to improve the ability of chess for non-professional players? Because I guess you spend a lot of time on learning, on just playing, and for non-professional players, if they don't earn money, how should they cope with that?
Well, I think play as much as you can anyway, and then analyzing the games. One of the big problems with technology now, and which I think is harming the development of a lot of players, is that they play their game and then immediately put it onto the computer to see what mistake they made. But I don't think that is very helpful, because it can tell you where you made a mistake, but it can't tell you why you made the mistake. So it's much better if you can analyze it by yourself or with a friend and try and go through it and try and figure out yourself where you made a mistake, and then put it on the computer, and then you can see where your thought process was wrong, rather than just where you made a bad move. Because there's too many different reasons you might make a bad move. So yeah, I think that's the most helpful. It's true that opening preparation is not really so relevant for the weaker players. It's the very top players spend almost their entire time on openings, but they've worked on the middle games and end games in the past as well, and still having to brush up that. So yeah, working on tactics, looking through your own games, I think those are the best two. And playing through top games as well. Yeah.
Also do statistical analysis of your own games, so not putting it on the computer and letting the computer tell you whether it was good or bad. So just from the psychological point, if I do, well, sometimes game forces you, I agree, but especially from the openings, just to determine if I played something too much of a time, so that my opponent will surely expect that I do something.
Yeah, I have to be careful with my opening choice. Yeah, I try and look at my own games and try and figure out what my opponent will be expecting, opening-wise, and then hopefully surprise them. But yeah, a lot of it is just choosing your opponents carefully in an opening. And I don't know if I do. I've tried to do little bits of work on some statistics as well, on seeing where I score badly, trying to figure out why I do, rather than just bad moves, but what types of position I don't play well. Yeah.
So if you play Stockfish on your phone, how fast do you drain your
I've no idea. I've got my wife's old phone, so the battery drains very quickly anyway if I'm doing absolutely anything on it. So.
You can play for time and wait for your opponent to die.
I don't think it should die immediately, but you can also play online on phones as well. But I don't do it because I want to protect my ratings a bit. But yeah, you can play anyone on your phone if you want to. But yeah, I guess it just depends on your phone. Yeah. Some people do that, yeah. I feel it's quite time-consuming, but I guess if you've got nothing, if you've got a couple of spare computers, then you can play against each other. And different computers' software gives different evaluations in the same position. So it's useful sometimes to see which one is understanding the position better. At least you play them against each other and see. So yeah, there's some point to it, but my style isn't to follow the computers completely anyway. I try to go my own way quite early on. So I have the computer running, but I'm not that interested in the objective advantage or disadvantage. I'm playing practically. But I think the correspondence players, for example, will get their position and then play through it with all of their engines, have lots of practice games against each other, see what the results are, see what plans are being used. And so that's why the level of correspondence is so much higher.